Hello EDM, this is Mr. Giomini. Tomorrow we have our, well, what would really be our Unit 9, because we've already finished Unit 9 EM, but it's going to be our Chapter 8 summative post-test, and I call it Chapter 8 because it is the 8th chapter in the pre-algebra textbook. So you guys actually did Chapter 1, and you've skipped all the way to Chapter 8, so pretty cool. Anyways, taking a look, and these are two types of problems that, if anything, that I'm a little worried about tomorrow, it's these two. Because we seem to be a little bit hesitant to use some of the strategies that I've tried to instill in you guys. So these are the simple interest problems we've talked about. Take a look at the first one here. Salim borrowed $12,375 for 4 years at an annual simple interest rate of 7.5%. If he makes one payment at the end of the loan, how much interest will he have to repay? So he's borrowing $12,375. I know that that is the principal. I'm going to come in here and actually put a P above it. That's the principal. That's how much he's borrowing. Remember, you can either borrow, that's the principal, or you can then put in like as a bond or something like that. That's where you're putting money into the bank, letting them use that money so that you can collect interest on it. Okay, now he's borrowing that money for 4 years. Okay, 4 years. I now know that that is the time. That's how long he has to pay that loan back at an annual simple interest rate of 7.5%. So annually he's paying 7.5% on that principal. So that would be my rate. If he makes one payment at the end of the loan, how much interest will he have to repay? So we're trying to solve for interest, the simple interest. So figure out how much money. Not only does he have to pay the $12,375 back, but he also has to pay interest on that. Remember the convenience of borrowing that money at the time. The bank wants to get some money back from you. So my formula is interest, or simple interest, equals the principal times the rate times the time. All I'm going to do is substitute in my values. So instead of using P now, I know that the principal that he borrowed was $12,375. I'm going to multiply that by the rate at which he's being charged interest, which is 7.5%. I'm going to convert that to a decimal. So it's 7.5% out of 100. So if you think about it, 7.5 or 7.5 over 100. To figure out that as a decimal, I divide, and that just moves decimal place 2 places to the left. So I now have 75 thousandths times the amount of time he has to pay it back, which is 4. Now when I multiply all that out, I should get how much he has to pay back in interest. So I'll break out my calculator here to help me out with some calculations. So I have $12,375 times. Remember, I converted 7.5% into a decimal because I said 7.5% out of 100%, or out of 100. I divided that. That's where I get that, moving that decimal 2 places to the left. It's going to get, the number appears to get smaller. It's really equivalent to 7.5%. So I times that by 75 thousandths, and I times that by how much time he has to pay it back, which is 4 years. I get I, or the simple interest, is equal to $3,712. And now here's my problem with some of you. You'll leave this as this. Remember, in money it takes out to the hundredths. This is to the tenths, so there's no number there, so I'll add a 0. So the interest that will accumulate on that loan is $3,712.50. So if you want to think about it, to figure out how much Salim really ends up paying back the bank, it's not just at $12,375. You include this. So he's really paying back a little over $16,000 to borrow that money, for the convenience of borrow that money over 4 years. Okay, taking a look at the next problem. Todd had to pay $1,147.50 of interest on a loan with an annual simple interest rate of 8.5% that he paid for 5 years. Assuming he makes one payment at the end of the loan, what was the principal of the loan? Okay, I'm going to start with the formula. Interest equals the principal times the rate times the time. If you were listening, they want to solve for the principal of this. So we don't know that, so I'm going to bring that P down, but let's go through this. Todd had to pay $1,147.50 of interest on a loan with an annual simple interest rate of 8.5% that he had for 5 years. Assuming he makes one payment at the end of the loan, what was the principal of the loan? Okay, so let's figure out what is what here. This says interest, so that means this is the I, not the P. So I can substitute that in for the I. So we have $1,147.50. Now that is equal to, remember what it says, we want to find out the principal. So I don't know the P. I know the annual simple interest rate was 8.5%. I'm going to again convert that to a decimal. 8.5% out of 100, that just means 8 and 5/10 divided by 100 to convert that to a decimal. So that's 0 and 85 hundredths, or thousand, sorry. Times that by the time, well, he had 5 years in order to pay that back. So I need to solve for the principal here. I'm going to again go to my calculator. Now that I have everything written out, I'm not just going to plug into calculators. I'm actually going to see, so I can kind of see what I'm doing here. Many of you are just using the calculator and pushing buttons and not really writing down to kind of see what we're solving for. So I don't know what P is. This is where the variable is at, the unknown. I need to get everything to this side of the equation, but first I'm going to do what this tells me and multiply these two. So I have 8,500 or 85 thousandths, I made that mistake again, times 5, which equals 425 thousandths. So I am left with, did nothing on this side, so it stays the same. 425 thousandths times P. I want to evaluate 4P. I want to solve for what is 1P worth, so I'll divide both sides by 425 thousandths. That cancels out, so I'm just left with P is equal to, so on the other side I have $1,147.50 divided by 425 thousandths. So because I want to find out the principal, I know the principal has to do with money. Now I know how much this person ended up borrowing. They ended up borrowing $2,700. If I wanted to check that answer, I could plug it back into the equation. I would substitute it in, so now I know the P, and if I multiply this out, it should give me $1,147.50. So let's just check that real quick. $2,700 times 8.5%, but I converted that to a decimal, so 85 thousandths times 5 equals, hey, look at that. That's a check, so I know I'm right. Okay, I hope this helped you out. Let me write this answer up here. For tomorrow's summative assessment, it's going to be a good one for you. The last real big test of your 6th grade mathematics career. Take care.